35. So I guess first on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. And does anybody need a copy of the minutes?
Nope, I read them when they were sent out. They looked lovely again.
Okay, well does everybody have a copy of them on them, because we're gonna come back to them for another discussion.
Have them in the, they're in here, right? I just gotta find them again.
Because we're gonna break these out for the goals discussion
Okay.
that comes up.
Meetings.
Okay, so I guess before we move off of the call to order, recognizing we do have a quorum at 4 of 7.
Don't mind me. Okay.
So on to approval of the minutes. Does anybody have anything they would like to change before we accept the minutes?
No.
It looked fine, like you said, when it came up immediately.
Alright, can I get a motion to accept them?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes
I
for March 28th, 2022. Sorry.
Yep, and I second.
Having a motion and a second, call a vote. Unless there's any other discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye on that, so they are accepted unanimously. So next thing is call for public comment. And do we have any public comment for anything on the agricultural accessory bylaw?
No.
Okay.
Oh, one public that we got going on.
I know, we usually got some pretty good comments.
Sure.
So moving down the agenda here, the next thing is review approval of goal list. And that was why I just made sure everybody had a paper copy of the minutes. Because really this ultimately is our goal list. And we need to have unity on this particular issue, because it's the foundation of what we're doing. And at some point, we're gonna switch from development of a zoning change to supporters of a zoning change. And when we do that, this is going to form the basis of a lot of our talking points, and it's also the foundation we're tying back to. So if everybody could take a look at that now, and then we'll have a discussion once it's fresh in everybody's mind. And that's item 3 specifically on the minutes from the last meeting, what we're looking at for the list of goals. So I don't think we need to have an official vote on this at the moment, but I just wanted to see, does anybody have anything that they think we need to adjust? We need to massage on that?
Yeah, encouraging business activity in order to stabilize the town budget. What does that mean?
So
I have problems with that.
well, I'm pausing for the moment to think about where to start on this. One of the challenges that we face as a community is finding ways to encourage types of development that don't totally change the type of community that we have. And we are under a lot of budget pressure, especially from the regional school.
Oh, I know. I understand the budget problems. What I don't understand is
It's not taxing the farms. We had this, I've talked with Keith about that, cause he was under the same impression. This doesn't mean extra taxation on the farm. This goes hand in hand, unless it's something like, oh, you're building a wedding venue, then obviously that's going to raise your property value. Stuff like that will bring up your property value, things like that. Pulling a special permit, that'd be like a one-time fee.
right.
It's not an ongoing thing. But if there's a wedding venue, say there's a wedding venue, let's just use that as a,
Good example.
yes.
Because it is a good example.
With the wedding venue, can bring in other businesses into town, like a cake maker, like a bed and breakfast, like the photography studios, like, you know, all these other different things that could go along with the weddings. We could be building other businesses that would also bring in tax revenue. So it's like little pieces of our cottage industry. If we can boost
Right.
the farms, we can boost our cottage industry as a whole. At least that's my mind put it as it. It's not going after the farms because the farms don't have a you know what I mean? There's no,
Right,
yes,
but that's not what this necessarily says.
exactly.
So I think
So maybe
this one
tweak it a
needs
little bit.
rewording.
Okay.
That's, yes,
So that way it doesn't seem like we're trying to tax farms.
correct, because we might all be in agreement,
Mm-hmm.
but 10 years from now, someone may come in and do what they do in other places and try and tax the heck out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to avoid that problem down the road when we're not participating anymore.
All right, so maybe encouraging business activity, oh, wait a minute, yeah. Encouraging business activities,
That would increase economic development in town.
yes, so
Bingo.
it's not
That
just
sounds
targeted
better.
at the farm,
Right,
yes.
yes,
And
Yeah.
just to clarify on one point that Kitty brought up, there probably are a couple uses that would actually generate direct revenue through permitting and licensing, because some of the examples from other towns are like running a brewery or distillery. Like if
Oh,
you're running
right.
a reasonable sized commercial brewery or distillery, you probably should be paying for some kind of town license or something along the lines of that. So
right,
But the average,
right.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, Keith and
Yeah.
I had the same discussion a few
yeah.
days ago. It's like, I don't want it to, yeah.
We've already moved on, so we're gonna leave the original language in the minutes, or do we wanna revisit that?
we're leaving the original language in the minutes.
Right, but for the new, review, you're rewriting that first goal.
Yeah. So encourage economic development. Okay.
How did you say that again? You said it's, I thought, quite well. Oh
So-
my God.
So I would need to dig through to look a little bit. The next item on the agenda is the discussion of the new source materials. And the reason I bring that up is because there is another document that I added to the share drive, which was actually done by the school system, in conjunction with Central Mass Planning. And there were a few things that happened in the document, like some of them were suggestions for the school systems, some of those were suggestions for the towns, and one of the suggestions for the towns was to foster businesses in essentially the way that we're talking about, that agritourism, ecotourism, making these towns the towns in the Quabbin district destinations for that type of stuff. So there's some language in there that I think would be good. I don't have it off the top of my head, so we can
So,
earmark it as economic development for the moment, and if I find that language, I'll just bring it up at the next meeting and we'll modify it then, if that makes sense to everybody.
yeah,
But the reason I also like stealing their language particularly is because it gives us something to tie back to instead of
Okay.
just having something we made out. Because not only, we're not just doing this, we are doing this to help farms, but we're also doing this because this has been recognized as a strategic goal of the town by MRPC, by CMRPC, and some other people. So, any other goals there that we want to go back and look at, or that we need to evolve more? Yep,
Well,
recognizing.
Mike Stahl, 5 Lombard Road. Going back to the wording on that, I think a lot of people would stub their toe on development, using that word, because development, rather than business activity, business activity, you want to, like Katie said, bring in the kind of peripheral businesses that support, using once again that example. I know I stub my toe when I hear the word development. It typically doesn't, for Hubbardston anyhow, doesn't mean it has a negative connotation.
Yeah, they go to big box.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Automatically.
yes. And then the other one, saving existing farms and reclaiming former farms. How do we reclaim former farms?
That was one of the ones I brought up. If you dangle the carrot of you can make money farming in a way that somebody wants to, by more than just planting, tomatoes and picking them yourself, some way that's a little bit more open, then the possibility is there that we do have a lot of farms that have not been farmed in a long time, that are overgrown or whatever. People may want to come here to buy those properties to actually start using them as farms again.
I think disused farm property is more of an appropriate way to.
Underutilized
Disused.
farmland?
Forgotten.
Yeah. Well, so
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're right. There is some stuff to stumble over there, because it also invokes the image of, well, are we going to be proposing that some of this woodland gets clear cut and turned back into farms? In some limited circumstances, yes, but that's not the primary purpose of it. I think.
Yeah. I know,
let's-
it's the way you word, you gotta word it just right, so that way you can understand it, but yeah, it's not like, oh, we're gonna clear cut Hubbardston to make farms across the whole town. But at the same time, there's a lot of farms that are overgrown, that haven't been farmed in a long time, but could be, in theory, turned back into a farm.
To
Promoting increased farmland usage, or, no, you want it as a farm. I didn't understand
Maybe
Yeah.
former
reclaiming
farms.
former farms.
Yeah,
So-
well, yeah.
so
it
let's-
is former
promoting-
farms.
Underutilized farmland, promoting
Let's-
farming. I don't
let's circle this and put a tick mark on it, because
So-
we are on a time thing. I very much hear the point you're making and believe, and thank you for it, because I think you're saving us a stumbling block further down the road.
Real quick, how
Yeah.
about saying, and we can modify it again, save existing farms and encouraging active farming on former farms.
There you go.
Encouraging active farming on former farms. We can think about it, but try
Mhm.
that wording.
No,
Better.
I like
Sounds
that.
good for this week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good
Where-
for this week, yeah. It's like a step in the
Glad I
right
could help.
direction, and
Yeah.
if we
Yeah.
need to go further.
Where, and we need to move on from this just because we're on a tight timeline for this one, but where there's a challenge, and where I think there might even be an issue with that, is all of Hubbardston was clear cut at one point. Like, there are no old growth forests in Hubbardston. It all was farmland if you go back,
Yes.
was 70 years at this point?
Yeah, but a lot of it is also in DCR or
Yeah.
North County Land Trust, or, one of the,
Yeah.
it's, so you're not gonna be able
Or
to,
NRCS,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
always gonna be farmland anyways.
Mhm.
Yep.
So, yes,
Yeah.
we have a huge percentage
Yeah.
that's already, so,
Okay, so let's leave it at it's an appropriately flagged issue, and we're gonna need to deal with it. Any others on those before we move on,
yeah, real
move down the
quick,
agenda?
developing a clear list of acceptable farm activities. I just want to say that we don't know 10 years from now what that might be.
Mhm.
So we have to be careful how we say that, that's all I'm thinking.
Mhm.
I'm not trying to say that,
Mhm.
oh, I totally agree,
Right.
cause like the farm activities that are now, they didn't think about 20 years ago, you didn't think about having
Yeah.
a
or even,
brewery.
ago.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
Harvest
the,
House.
the, s-
Yeah.
the brew places and stuff, they
Yeah.
didn't exist 10 years
No.
ago.
Yeah.
So, yes, we gotta remember that.
Okay.
And so, a clear list,
Or
Or
now
is
in
it-
the future.
or a
Well,
suggested, so, it's one, it's,
Yeah.
again, it's wording,
yeah,
and how that list comes together has to be careful, that's all.
Okay.
Not a big deal, other than we don't wanna box it in and become outdated.
well, that's the whole thing, if becomes outdated, just like our farm bylaw now is outdated, that's the point of this, to bring it up in this century. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah,
And it
but
can always be,
we hope so.
Yeah.
But if we can avoid it as much as possible,
And-
that's great.
Anything else on any of the goals?
Nope.
Alright, so now into where I would like to spend pretty much most of the meeting. And if it's alright with Mark had sent me a breakdown of possible planning tools. I'd like to share that with everybody, cause I've been biting my tongue about how much I wanted to talk about this. But,
all statistics.
Okay.
so,
What would make you think that?
I know.
Katie?
so Mark
Great stuff.
had sent me this message, kind of reading my mind about where I think we could be going, and what we could be doing, because there's some things that have jumped out to me, where the idea of doing a standard accessory bylaw, it probably just doesn't work for us, because we have an issue with the size of the farms and with the dollar amounts, where if we base it that way, it's not gonna be something that's gonna have any kind of impact, and we're gonna do a bunch of work for something that's gonna have
Correct.
minimal impact on what's going on. So an extra copy, Mike?
Thank you.
So to, I guess, get everybody caught up on this, so there's a few things there's lots of things that towns can do with zoning, but there's really probably 3 things that are applicable to what we're currently working on. One would just be to do an agricultural accessory use bylaw, which is like what Rutland has done, what Bolton has done, what the bill proposed in the state senate, I believe it was, is doing, where they set this floor on, you can have accessory use up to 25% of what you're doing, and then that's just it, and they put a whole bunch of stuff in. So that's one way. The next way is to kind of do a redlining or blue penciling of the zoning that we have in the regular section of the zoning, to try to accomplish the stuff that we're talking about, where we actually just go in and we make edits. Because really, we have a town center, we have commercial zoning, and then everything else in the town is residential agriculture. And if you haven't looked at it before, that's the map right there, where the green is the residential, agricultural. The town center is that thing that looks like a little hurricane trying to go up a track right there. And then that's our commercial zone with a little bit down at the 4 corners there. Because one of the approaches we could take would just be to make some amendments to what is in our residential agricultural zoning. We'll talk about them after we run down the list. And then the third one, which is the idea of doing an overlay district, where we would essentially have like a rural enterprise overlay district, or a agricultural, or whatever it comes known as, and what that would turn into would be essentially another layer on the map, where a good example is what we're currently doing with the battery energy storage bylaw that's going up at the next town meeting. So there's only a few places in town where you can put these giant commercial scale battery systems to try to stabilize the power grid. And we identified that based upon the wiring, based upon where the commercial zoning is, and we're essentially doing it as an overlay, although I think that might have just changed. But that's the plan of it. You look at where this can go, where this can work, and you essentially just make another layer on the map. So, looking at that, I guess let's open it up to a discussion, because this is the big question, and we either need to come to a general consensus on this, or walk away from this meeting knowing for sure how we're going to answer this question in as short of amount of time as possible. So I'd like to open the floor up.
Alright, so the 3 options are the general one, like Rutland. Option 2 is getting permitted uses, and that's on a farm by farm basis. And option 3 would be putting in certain overlay districts in certain areas, depending on, I'm assuming, traffic accessibility?
You could,
But do I have the first two correct? Do I have the
Well,
first two correct?
the second one doesn't, I mean, you said something about it
Well,
being a
like,
farm by farm review.
Yeah, would it be a farm by farm review
But it would
or no?
it would actually change the list of allowed uses in the entire residential agricultural zone.
Okay,
It'd
The
be-
whole town,
It would be a red
basically.
line, it would be a redlining of all of the zoning for that green section up there.
okay. So it could, well then how would that be different than option number 1?
So option number 1 is a limited agricultural accessory bylaw that gets plugged into the back of essentially our zoning bylaws.
Okay,
In order,
Like a
in order to be eligible for accessory use,
yeah,
your primary use on the property has to be
the farm.
agriculture.
Okay,
Yeah,
alright.
yeah, and
That's my main sticking point
And-
with it.
Well, yeah, because some of these could potentially be way more than hay, you know, or like your alpacas bring in, or you know, like, cause yeah, depending on the farm. Okay, so you're saying it wouldn't necessarily have to be by the dollar amount, it would be by a specific list or
so
use.
For the second option.
Yeah,
on the first
just
one,
making sure.
it has to, it would have to be an accessory use, so it would have to be tied to dollar amount or land percentage or something
Okay.
along those. And it would,
Yeah.
Something that
It would have
defines
to be
it as
secondary.
agriculture.
Okay,
yeah, something that makes it an accessory. The second one would essentially be a fairly substantial and meaningful rewrite of the allowable uses
okay,
and how those individual uses get treated within the green zone.
okay, so in other words, it wouldn't be tied to the dollar amount.
No,
No.
and it
Okay.
would be to all of the properties.
Okay, alright. Alright, and then the third is we cherry pick areas.
You could
Or-
define areas of town that you want to encourage activities in. You could apply it to the entire rural agricultural zone.
Okay, then
So-
how would that be different from 2? If
Be-
we overlaid it through the whole,
So where it would be different is it would be kind of another zoning module without having to open up our current zoning. It would be in addition to what currently exists
okay,
for properties that qualify for the overlay. And there's stuff that we would obviously exclude from the overlay, like Pinecrest. Like none of this would make sense
yeah,
for that.
no, they're just,
Or like some of those neighborhoods where the density is just too high.
okay,
And I think there's some really good benefits to doing it that way. One of them being, it helps deal with some of the potential political opposition that comes up to it. Because if you have like a neighborhood that's really strongly against it in some way, shape, or form, and they express that, well, that neighborhood just comes off the overlay map. And there are some where it just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
It also gives a little bit of flexibility down the road because, to the point that came up earlier, tides change, boards and committees change, and sometimes you get like the commercial zone pushing one way, then back the other way, and this would make it so I believe the third one would be probably the most likely to be a long-term sustainable approach. Because if there was a change in public sentiment, instead of undoing the whole thing, you would just take the affected area out of the overlay.
okay. Would this still mean that they'd have to go for like special permits and things like that, like say a brewery, like when you start getting into the big stuff?
Yeah, some things would, it would be up for us to define in the overlay district in terms of what uses we believe would be allowable in it
And
and
what-
what kind of clearance those usages would have to go through.
Okay.
Unless, I don't know if you saw it a different way, I'm taking your document here, so.
Yeah. Well, this is why I'm gonna ask all the questions, cause I didn't, I wasn't, this is the, I wanna hear how this document,
Well,
the thoughts.
yeah. One of the questions you had was how does the third option differ from the second option? And one of the ways that I see it differing is that I think we would need to create a new review process for these types of activities that are, that need a little attention.
Yeah,
but I'm not sure that we wanna send them into the existing special permit review process.
So create a
I
new
think we-
process for the
I
planning
think
board
we need a new junior
process.
special permit review.
Yeah. So what Rutland did in their bylaw is they had
He wants more work.
and there are problems with it. So
Major.
but just as an example, so like the layers that they had is there were special permit things,
Yeah,
and then there were site plan review things, and then there were allowable by right things. So I'm not saying that that is a way to do it, but that's an example of how stratification like that can be done. And to the issue where we have a lot of issues is the town coming to grips with what the future building commissioner situation is gonna look like.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those kind of intermediate
Mhm.
layers, when you look at how they're handled other places in our bylaws, it's subject to approval of the building commissioner. And that building commissioner is not going to be Gardner going forward. Where we're looking to have it be somebody local, I think is what the current discussion is. But-
yeah, we're looking at tagging up with possibly other towns in that would be more of our, like, Quabbin district, cause they're having some of the same issues right now that we are with, it's hard to get a building commissioner for these rural towns that only have so many hours per week, so we gotta kinda glob together
Yeah.
to be able to
Yeah.
afford.
Well, that might be one avenue. I mean,
But it-
somehow we need to introduce some kind of discretionary
Yes,
Yeah.
but the thing is,
reviewability.
if you put it
Because
in
our
one
existing,
person-
our existing special permit review is not tenable for a small farmer or a small activity.
No,
I agree,
it's not.
but
You just wouldn't do it.
Even the site plan review
But
is
if you put
tough
it
for
in
someone.
the hands of one person, think of what does that one person see though? You know what I mean? I will see things totally differently than Keith is gonna see something. So that's the only problem I have with putting some of this bigger stuff in one hand. Because then if they see fault in it where somebody else wouldn't, it's shut down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, you-
Unless they go to like zoning
you
board
have
of
an appeal.
appeal.
You either send it to the ZBA or the planning board for appeal.
True.
I'd
but
probably
I'm
send
just-
it to the planning board.
I'm
for
just
appeal.
saying, it's like, so that's the only cautionary, it's the
Right.
same thing, depending on who's
Oh,
looking
yeah.
at it,
Yeah.
how they see it, are they pro-farm, or are they
Well,
more
Farm,
like,
pro-business,
this should be, this should be,
well, that's also why the goals and purposes are important too. Because ultimately in whatever we do, we would
Spell it
put the
out.
purpose in it.
Yeah.
Like those other towns did with their changes.
So who handles it in Rutland? Any of this?
In Rutland, some goes to special permit for the planning board, and then I
And
believe the
some
site
is by
plan
right.
review.
No, they don't.
I thought-
They never, the main flaw in their
Oh,
bylaw is that they do not send it to site plan review. They do not send it to special permit. They only send it to site plan review, which is not a way that you can reject an
Yeah.
application with case law in Massachusetts. You
Yeah,
can-
so that,
well, but that's another story.
yeah.
Okay,
So
that's good to know.
That's something we need to fix and sort out. And
Yeah.
and no matter which one of these we go to, that is going to be a question we need to answer. So
Right.
whether it's option 1, 2, or 3, that's going to be a common problem with all of them. So I don't know that steers the
which-
direction we
sorry.
go towards.
What's the common problem?
The stratification of how these things get handled. I guess
Oh,
with
yeah.
number 2 it
Yeah.
would be because we just go into the current
Yeah.
special permitting structure, which we shouldn't do. And then the first one, we essentially would have to specify how we expected all this stuff to work in the same way. we
well,
would with all three.
especially with some of the smaller farmers, they can't, like, some of the plans and stuff that have come out through special permits and like like, they can't, unless you're gonna like, they don't have the means to do that.
And it can't be
You know?
a 2-year plan.
Yeah.
It's gotta be something that can be handled in 3
Yeah.
months.
Yeah,
With that said, if you're talking about either like, if you're talking about a commercial brewing enterprise,
Well,
or
that
you're
would
talking
be-
about like a wedding venue or something
Yeah.
where you have to have significant sanitation, that is appropriate for a site plan or special permit or that kind of thing, so. But if somebody is like hosting a crafting event or hosting,
But even the
on-site
wedding
sales.
venues, some of them you can get away with not having to have significant, you know what I mean? Like, it would have to be, like, that kind of stuff would have to go by the numbers of what the guest allowance, like, if you're having small weddings for 50 and under,
yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
but if you're building this elaborate, you know, venue that has fireplaces and, you know, they're gonna host 500 people, then yeah. You know? Like,
So-
jeez.
so that's getting
But
into the
anyway.
weeds and down the road,
Right.
because either way, it's something we
But
gotta
it
figure
still
out.
makes you think about how we wanna approach.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So when I first read this, I've had the benefit of having this for a while. It was a yes, that is exactly where I am going, and hoping that we're going to end up with this. And I really want to talk about this with everybody, but we are going to follow the open meeting laws, which is why we're addressing it today, how we're addressing it. So I originally was like, I don't know about doing an overlay on this, but the more I've read it and the more I've thought about it since, the more I think that makes sense, despite the fact that it will be a bunch of work up front to start with.
I think tying it to the dollar amount will eliminate any.
So much.
Yes, it will.
So-
Anyone that's really wants to go for it, you know,
Yeah.
like you said, the breweries or like they have out there like Davis Animal Farm, stuff like that. That's it. It eliminates anything, any kind of possibilities like that.
And I think what finally pushed me over the edge for the overlay on why that's the right way to go, is really the problems of the other ways. So the problems with the accessory is we've already come to realize that, well, some properties, if you're just selling hay, you could have a very significant amount of land dedicated to just that, but your net at the end of the year is pretty small, so if you're talking about using that as the yardstick, you're doing 25 or 50% of that, there isn't going to be much for an accessory use off of that. And that was true with a lot of things, so that we weren't going to be able to be impactful. Then number two, the thing that I didn't like about that was because it makes every battle about every inch of the residential agricultural district, because everybody's going to look at that and think, oh well, that's going to be my backyard. And technically they would be correct making that assumption. So so I didn't like it for that reason. This third one allows us to kind of carve up the map in terms of what makes sense. And like some of the denser residential areas where there's maybe like a lot or two that would qualify for it, we can take those out of it, and we can take away that kind of fear aspect that I think people would have. And I think there's an awful lot we have to debate about what this is actually going to look like. But I personally like that number 3 as the process, even though there's obviously a lot to figure out.
Yeah, there's a lot to figure out, but I think after digging into it a little bit, it sounds the most plausible for a long-term fix.
And Mark actually, I believe, volunteered to do quite a bit of the work in this, so I'm just going to
He
circle
loves it.
that.
Every second of it. What do you
Um,
think, Keith? We haven't
I
heard much
agree.
from you, and you're one of the
Quiet.
farms in town. I know, but you're one of the farms in town, for Pete's sake.
I agree, I mean, it makes sense, for example, not to pour brewery in Dogwood,
Yeah.
you know, or Pinecrest, like you said, or something like that. You know, something that's going to bring thousands of people, over a period of time. So yeah, the idea of being able to cherry pick, for lack of a better word, where things can be or not be, makes sense to me too.
It does give each area a bunch of options based on size
I mean, normally
and road accessibility and stuff like that.
yeah, I mean, what we're, what we're describing is a typical zoning process, and most towns would approach this by creating zones for
But this-
particular activities in the town.
Right, and this is just an overlay
it's,
of modernizing
Yeah,
in a rural
it's
thing,
kind of,
yeah,
it's kind of doing that
yeah,
without changing our entire
and that's,
zoning code.
and that's a good thing too.
Yeah, I think the political reality of it is the rural enterprise, I think, goes pretty well at a town meeting.
It sounds-
A
I like the
total
words.
overhaul of our residential agricultural zoning is going to create all kinds of problems. Now, from a planning board perspective, we need that at some point in the near future, cause there are a lot of things in our zoning that doesn't make sense. That is way past the scope of this committee, and that is the kind of thing that we would go out and we would get a grant for hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. We're here to make a recommendation to the planning board and the select board about what we think is going to help the most people possible in a way that's consistent with what was originally proposed by the agricultural accessory bylaw itself. So my one kind of hang up on all of this is we need to make sure we do something that gets the people in town who currently need relief to run the businesses that they're running, and keep them running and hopefully grow them and keep those businesses for agribusinesses. Be clear, agribusinesses. And I don't want to do anything that puts in danger that kind of immediate relief that we know we need in town right now for something that's going to be a bigger scale. And I think this number 3, it straddles that line enough, whereas number 2, it can't help but turn into a total overhaul of our zoning system, which we arguably need, but I don't think it's going to pass in the near future. So, and what
Small
are
town fun.
yeah. and Katie, I've only been in town, I don't even know how many years, about 3-4 years at this point. So I kind of look towards you in terms of what you think the capacity and political sentiment is on it. But
Well, I think in general, over the years, people like rural. That's why they move here, because it's quiet and peaceful. So adding businesses has to be done in a smart way, and I can't see a smarter way than farms, because we already have them. If we can encourage them to become and do things that some of them are already doing on small scale, to be able to do them a little bit more open and better for themselves, like I said, it can, in theory, kind of trickle out effect and help build our cottage industry that is what the only businesses realistically that we have in town. We have a small little bit in the center, but most businesses in town are cottage industry. So if we can help make them flourish or create new ones, like I would love to see a wedding venue or two, and then, you know, bed and breakfasts. There's so many properties in this town that would be gorgeous bed and breakfast. But again, it's like the trickle down, the same with adding photographers, adding the cake people, and adding all these, maybe a tourist, go to the Indian caves, and, a kayaking rental or whatever goes along with it. And it can also filter into using our open space land to our advantage as well. So again, tapping into the tourist and agriculture is, I think, the smartest way and the most palatable way that people see it in town. They don't want big box. Half the people freak out as soon as they hear Dunkin' Donuts. So let alone anything large scale, it's just not gonna happen. And we don't have the commercial space to do it. We don't have the infrastructure to do it. The only way you can look at it, you gotta look at the rural aspect, which is the farm. So I do feel like this could be and everyone loves to go to Stone Cow, and everybody loves to go to Hardwick Winery, and everybody loves to go to the corn mazes and everything else. So why are we sending our money out of town? Why can't we keep it here? It doesn't make any sense. So, anyway, that's all I got.
So that sounded like a long,
Yes.
about, yes, you believe it.
I believe
it's
it.
passable.
I believe it is.
So, I guess that leaves us to kind of answer the question. Is this something we feel like we need to take a vote on? Or does anybody not think that number 3 is the answer? I guess that's the best way, that the method in number 3, approaching it as an overlay. I am gonna have to go back to the planning board with that, so I caveat it as, yes, that is potentially the approach we'd be looking to take, but I need to go back to my colleagues on the planning board to make sure they actually have my back on that, so.
Well, not to
have
mention, they
our
might have
backs on it.
something that they thought of that we haven't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's
To-
true. Well, and this is also slightly beyond the original scope we were charged with, so that's why I also have to report to them too. But it's the right answer. I believe it's the right answer.
Yeah, take it to them, that we're, in general, wanna
In
go this
agreement.
way, get their ideas, cause there may be a little bit more wording that we have to do to say it well.
When's the next planning board meeting?
Tomorrow night.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, same place.
Is it? I thought that was canceled.
Planning board is canceled by
Yeah.
the,
Did it get canceled?
Yeah.
on the
On the
town
town website.
on the town
Oh, it got
website.
canceled on the website?
Yeah.
I wonder if that means well, either way, I don't wanna talk about planning board business
Yeah,
right
no,
now.
that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, well, it was
Yeah, I was
tomorrow
like, I
night.
swear it said canceled,
Yeah.
and you were like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, then, the week after that.
Yeah. So
Yes.
one of the thoughts I was having, for the review process with permits is one of the Ag Commission should be maybe involved as the other half of reviews or something like that. Because that is a commission that exists and has existed, and, that might be a good committee, if you will, cause it is to, be the other part
Mhm.
of the review process.
Oh, you're talking about like in the actual application of the rule.
But just think, you know,
Yeah.
when you're trying to create that bubble of how this is gonna be worded and all the rest, I'm thinking the Ag Commission,
That's an interesting thought.
is the other part of that review process.
Yeah, maybe if you get
Now,
a run through them first or
Granted,
something.
if they're gonna install bathrooms and all the rest, obviously they're gonna get building permits, they're gonna go through the traditional things, Board of Health for septic and all the rest. All that's gonna stay the same. And when you're talking to people, those things aren't gonna change if that's something that has to be done. However, the Ag Commission, could be part of the other part of the, balance of reviews. You were mentioning about having more than one layer, or to some effect.
I think it's something we're gonna have to,
So
yeah,
it-
I like it.
Yeah, it's
Because
interesting.
they exist,
Interesting idea.
and, most of the, there's always a couple non-farmers on the group, and the rest are farmers, and
So ultimately, I think that's gonna lead to a couple questions for MRPC and potentially town council on what we can actually do for it. But that is certainly something we should consider.
because right now, they're the ones that if there's a complaint about animals and stuff, people in town are supposed to go to the Ag Commission to let them handle it.
Okay.
Now, whether people do or not, it's another story, but that is part of the way it's supposed to happen in town.
What is it called again? The what?
The Ag Commission.
Ag, thank you.
Yeah, Keith is on
Agricultural
it.
Commission.
Right, so just to make sure I
Okay.
am summarizing correctly here, so we'll definitely make sure that the idea for the Ag Commission gets in the minutes. And to make sure I'm summarizing correctly on number 3, or summarizing here on the method, because this is ultimately the only thing we need to get done tonight. We do have a general consensus that looking at it as if it is going to end up as a rural enterprise overlay district is going to be our favorite approach. I am going to ask the planning board if they support that approach. And we'll see what happens from there on that. So this next item, the discussion of property threshold for coverage by zoning bylaw revision, let's just scratch that, because if we're talking about doing this as
It's a big issue that we'll have to address, but not
Yeah.
in 10 minutes.
not in 10 minutes, we'll have to come back to it. Plus, the character of it is gonna change if we do it as the overlay district, because then we're not talking about a dollar amount for the property, and it's a whole different question, so.
Right.
So then.
But it still exists. I mean,
Yeah,
well,
oh,
well,
yeah.
it depends. It depends on whether the overlay district is strictly a geographic area overlay, or if there's some criteria that makes it
Yeah.
eligible for the overlay. You know,
Yeah.
I had suggested thinking about it in terms of lot size as being a potential qualifier for this overlay, but we'll talk more about.
Yeah, lot size, nature, usage, those kinds of things. Yeah, it changes the question, because it's no longer just a dollar threshold.
Yeah.
So, we'll need to readdress what that question is. So I guess let's talk about the next meeting date. I would like to really wanna get Brian here, which is
Yes.
how we ended up jumping around so much last time. I would like to try to stay opposite of the select board, just because I think it makes it easier to have a known quantity for everybody, instead of trying to guess around it. So that would mean, when are you guys meeting next?
We're meeting on the 25th. And let me see, hold on, 2020 meetings.
Cause then wouldn't you normally meet on the 2nd?
Hold on, I'm gonna, oh crap, that's the old ones. Share drive, go back, hold on. Meeting calendars.
The other thing about next week is the Board of Health meeting is not gonna happen.
Okay.
It's canceled. So if you want a Tuesday slot next week, for some reason, that'll work.
Alright.
Yeah, Tuesdays don't tend to work for me.
Okay, that's fine.
So let's.
So it says here, tentatively, March 2nd, March 15th.
May,
Well,
May.
excuse me,
May.
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 Shoot. Let's try that again. May 10th, which is the 9th. Hold on. They crossed it out because they just copy and paste. So the 9th would be the meeting after that. So it's the 25th, which is next Monday. I know we have a meeting. And then it would be the 9th and then the 23rd.
So we would be good for the 2nd,
According to this, yes.
if the 2nd works for everybody else.
May 2nd.
Yeah, May 2nd, 6:30.
May 2nd, 6:30. Okay.
We're just finishing up.
Don't worry, we're
Oh,
finishing
okay.
up.
Yeah,
You're fine.
okay. It's alright.
What time?
6:30.
6:30.
Yeah, and we'll plan a little bit of time for that one.
Good Lord willing.
Yep, so in terms of things that we'll be talking about, I would like to start going into the list of uses. Because no matter which way we end up on kind of those 3 options of plan, the list of uses, we're gonna need it for any of them.
Yep.
So work that we do on that won't be wasted, so I'm gonna put that on as an agenda item, and I'll send out some materials ahead of time. Uses, and I will also catch up with Mark in between to better flesh out some of the elements we're gonna need to put together, so we can have a written out plan process for where we're going. Anybody else have anything they wanna stick on that agenda? Okay, so matters not reasonably anticipated by the chair or any additional public comments. Okay. So how about a motion to adjourn?
I'd make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Aye.
And a vote,
I
I
Aye.
and we are done at